and I'm sure the desert of this just year makes those of what it count anymore was uh, surface down around our water and all of it like here. All not from question uh, uh, how of us do why yeah works about why drinking next do
Everybody, uh, to our water and it's a really uh, city and for drink with service. Okay, so hopefully you can see that, but so to start, I wanted to share, the general thing that water is a complex topic. It has complex challenges and complex solutions. So water is used in many ways across the Treasure Valley, and each of those ways are valuable and important. And effective water management requires that all of us use, participate, and collaborate to ensure that that water is used in the best way possible. So we're really fortunate tonight to have some of our water partners here in the room with us to help share some information and help us answer questions. So we have representatives from several of our irrigation districts here, and we also have Joss Zamzos, who will follow my presentation with tips about how you can maximize water resources in your home and garden. But first, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about how we get our water in the Treasure Valley and ultimately where that water goes. So this is a really great resource that I wanted to share with everybody. If you're curious to learn more about water supply in the Treasure Valley, then we can share in this hour tonight. So BSU has put together a really great resource. It's called the Treasure Valley Water Atlas. And it gives really great detail and graphics that talk about water, where it comes from, the state of water in the Treasure Valley. And many of the graphics in the presentation which leads to the next point. Is that moisture and water that goes into the upper basin enough for the lower basin requirements? And where does that water go once it gets to the lower basin? So we get approximately 3.5 million acre feet of water in the upper basin on an average year. And about 1.6 million acre feet of that is lost in evapotranspiration. What that is the use and uptake and evaporation by plants and vegetation. So we get about 2 million acre feet coming out of the upper basin into the lower basin. So in the water industry, we talk in a lot of units. So what is an acre foot? So an acre foot is if you took 1 acre, so about the size of a football field, and you filled that to 1 foot depth. That's 1 acre foot. And it's estimated that 1 acre foot of water will serve the freshwater needs of a family of 5 for 1 year. So if we have about 750,000 people in the Treasure Valley, you would need, in theory, about 200,000 acre feet of water. And we're receiving 2 million acre feet of water from the upper basin. So we should be fine. We should have plenty of water, right? Well, there's some challenges with that related to the form of the water in the upper basin and when that water arrives in the lower basin. So in a good water year, most of the water in the upper basin should hopefully be stored as snow. If more of that comes as rain, or if temperatures increase and spring runoff comes faster or sooner, you can have supply challenges. So what you'll see in this graph is the majority of the upper basin flow comes in March through June. And after that, there's not a much more additional supply that's coming into the lower basin. So what do we do to try to mitigate that? We store it in our 4 primary reservoirs. So that's Lucky Peak, Arrow Rock, Anderson Ranch, and Lake Lowell. However, we only have about 1 million acre feet of that 2 million acre feet that's coming to the lower basin in storage capacity. So even though we have plenty of water coming into the lower basin, the timing and storage of that can be problematic. So the irrigation, we have over 40 irrigation entities in the Treasure Valley that really do try to manage those flows and timing, but it's not an easy task. So once the water reaches the lower basin, it's distributed and supplied throughout a significant network of delivery canals and return drains in the valley that allow us to have the farming and landscaping that we do today. So this slide is really interesting, and it shows how water is used once it hits the lower basin. So about 4,000 cubic feet per second is released from Lucky Peak in the peak of the summer. And essentially 100% of that flow is diverted in some way and used for irrigation. Right off the bat, about 2,000 CFS is diverted to the New York Canal. So to give you a little bit of perspective, 2,000 CFS is equal to about 1.3 billion gallons in a day. So in 2021, over the full year, Meridian residents used 4.3 billion gallons of potable water. So our total municipal water use in Meridian in 1 year is equal to about 4 days of flow in the New York Canal in the summer. So what happens to that surface water once it gets down into the lower basin? About 1/3 of it evaporates, about 1/3 of it seeps into the ground through watering, replenishing some of the shallower groundwater layers, and about 1/3 of it is returned back to the rivers to continue to flow downstream. So in Meridian, we have 4 primary irrigation districts that manage and distribute the surface water for irrigation use throughout the city. Meridian does have about 16% of its residents that use the city's potable water for irrigation. If you're unsure which source you use for irrigation water, take a look at your water bill in the summer. If your water bill is generally flat throughout the whole year, you're likely on surface water irrigation supplied by an irrigation district. If you have a large increase in your water bill in the summer, it's likely that you're using city potable water for your irrigation. For both of those irrigation sources, though, it's important to spread the timing of that demand of when you use the water and try to spread that peak demand out. So we'll learn a little bit more about that, but it's hardest on the systems to have everybody try to water at the same time or on the same day. So while I'm not a hydrologist, engineer, or meteorologist, I have collected some information from recent surface water supply forecasts to share with you a high-level outlook for the surface water supply this summer and how it may impact your irrigation water supplies. So you may be wondering why, even with a wet and cool April that brought our current percent of annual precipitation up to around 90%, why much of Idaho is still listed as being in drought conditions. So while April helped us tremendously in our water supply picture, and put us in a much better spot than where we would have been, we really missed the key time this winter to build the snowpack. So as you can see from this graph, we had nearly 90 days in January through April where we had very little moisture. And that was putting us on track to be well below the average water year. And that's that green shaded area. So in April, it got us back into the normal zone for this year. However, we missed some of that key snowpack building period, which is represented in that difference there from the black line. So you'll see we only reached about 70% of our peak snowpack this winter. And when you compound that with with the water year that we had last year and the very hot summer, we started out the season with very little carryover water in our storage reservoirs. So we're really only about 73% full on our reservoirs starting out this season. So additionally, meteorologists are predicting a summer with slightly below normal precipitation and slightly above normal temperatures. So while we're certainly not in as bad of shape as we would have been without the rain and cool temperatures in April, we still need to be mindful about our irrigation practices this summer. So shifting from surface water to groundwater to talk a little bit specifically about Meridian, the supply picture changes a little bit. So in the Treasure Valley, we sit between two mountain ranges with two major rivers that serve as the primary source for groundwater replenishment. So wells are drilled at various depths around the Treasure Valley to access this water source for various purposes. So the Treasure Valley has a complex network of shallow and deep aquifer levels. So as we mentioned, the shallow aquifer is primarily replenished by precipitation, river flows, and canal flows, but most of our municipal wells do not draw from the shallow aquifer levels. We draw most of our municipal water from deep aquifers that are about 400 to 800 feet deep, that are replenished in a large part from the upper basin flow as it enters the Treasure Valley via the Boise River. So the deep aquifers that Meridian utilizes have significant retention times, some between hundreds and thousands of years, that really allow for long-term aquifer stability. So in Meridian, we pump from our groundwater from our 26 wells in our distribution system, which has over 600 miles of pipe to supply the water throughout the city. So as I mentioned earlier, Meridian's been monitoring and planning for its long-term water needs for many years. The aquifer below Meridian is sustainable for our current and future uses for full city build out. So an example I wanted to share with you is that we had a well that we took out of service for maintenance. This well had been pumping regularly for over 9 years, delivering over 4 billion gallons of water during that time. When we took the well down to do maintenance, it only took 18 days for the aquifer to refill back up to pre-well installation days. So when Meridian looks to full city build out, we look at several elements to ensure that we're planning adequate water supply. So full city build out is estimated to be somewhere around 350,000 people and occur somewhere in the 2074 timeframe. So even though that's a long ways away, we want to make sure that we have the supply to meet that demand level in the future. So one of the components we look at is the average daily demand. And although we've seen that number drop considerably over the past 30 years, due in part to changes in plumbing code that requires more efficient water use, we still use a conservative number for planning. So our estimates for full city build out with 350,000 people, we estimate that Meridian will need about 43,000 acre feet of water per year to supply its residents. So can we provide that? The answer is yes, we can. So one of the elements in providing water is whether you have a legal right to provide that water. So Meridian has today over 57,000 acre feet of water rights, meaning that we have the legal entitlement to beneficially use that water. So not only do we have sufficient water rights, but we also have sufficient pumping capability and aquifer supply to provide services at full build out. So another thing that Meridian does with each new subdivision that comes in is we run modeling scenarios to ensure that each new development can be served with max demand. And what I call max demand is sort of your worst case scenario. So it's the water that would be required to put out a fire on the highest demand day of the year with the most important pump out of service. So we do not approve developments if we don't have the infrastructure and the water supply to supply them to those standards. So while Meridian's groundwater supply, water rights, and pumping capacity appear to be robust and sustainable for long-term build out of the city, we're always looking for new water supply opportunities to make our portfolio even more robust. So one of those is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to gain additional water storage in Anderson Ranch Reservoir. So you may have heard about the raising of Anderson Ranch Dam. That project would build about 29,000 additional acre-feet of storage. And while the costs have not been determined exactly yet to purchase stake in this storage, the city has established their interest in continuing discussions on this and other new water supply projects. So in summary, I hope this presentation has provided information about Treasure Valley's complex but robust water picture. So Meridian is very well positioned to provide the municipal drinking water needs for the city for generations to come. And while this cool, wet spring was helpful in the overall surface water supply picture, we still need to be mindful of our water use this year. And there are things that we can all do to help conserve this important resource. So to that end, I would like to turn it over to an expert in that area, Joss Zamzos. He is the co-CEO of Zamzos, a locally owned garden and pet supply store in the Treasure Valley that has roots that go back to 1933. So I think there's few people that are more educated to speak on how we can all optimize our lawns and gardens and soil to use water as best as we can in the Treasure Valley climate. So please help me turn it over to Joss.
All right. So this is the 5th time that I've done this presentation in this valley this spring already. We've been talking about this concept for years. It's just that when there's plenty of water, nobody really wants to hear. The message that I'm delivering really is that you can have a nicer lawn if you water less. If you water properly, you'll have less weeds, less disease, a greener grass, and you save money on water, and you save water, right? And so the tenets that I'm sharing with you, this is not about a panic move to try to conserve water. This is about doing it right, and doing it right makes everything work better, including saving water. So there's a few concepts that we're really helping people understand. The very first concept is what we're calling building your lawn's drought muscle. And grass has a capacity to handle periods where it doesn't have water all the time, but you build up to it. Just like when you go to the gym and you work out in a gym, you stress those muscles to build them. And the way that you build your lawn's capability to handle less water, deeper water and less frequently, is by drought stressing it on purpose. So what a lot of people don't recognize is that thirsty grass does not turn brown, it turns blue. And I share that with you, and you can see it in your front yard. As your grass starts to get thirsty, it gets a slaty blue color. Now that drought stress will encourage the roots of the grass to go down in search of water. And then you water deep and then stop watering and wait for that wilt. Now, if you let it go for a month, it will turn brown. But if we do this, encouraging the grass to wilt just a little bit, we will send the roots down. And that will allow us to water deep and infrequent. And I'll get into, in a few minutes, all the other advantages to doing that. But I grew up on the bench in Boise, and we had water on Tuesday. And there were 6 other families that had water all the rest of the week. So Dad would have had to go fight somebody, or Mom would have had to make a pie if we wanted to water twice in a week. We just couldn't have any options. And we had beautiful green Zamzo family quality lawns watering one day. And people can do that as well. Your grass will actually like it better. The expert, Darwin McKay, who actually wrote the manual on turf, recommends 1 inch of water per week in as few days as we can possibly do. And that's right now until it starts to get hot. Now, everybody always says, well, how many minutes is that? And that's where we get into this next concept of we have to understand how much water are you actually putting down, because time is not a measure of volume. So what we're recommending that people do is what we're calling a water audit. If you get a calibrated gauge, And I've told probably 1,000 people in my career, get a tuna can or something like that. The trouble is you really need 4 cans of tuna. Nobody ever eats that many, but you'd need 4. And you would somehow have to calibrate them so that you had a readable number, which is difficult because if they're ribbed or if they have rounded bottoms or whatever, it's more complex than just putting out tuna cans. But if you put a calibrated gauge like this out, we recommend 4. There's 4 in this little kit. Put them in and you turn the water on for 15 minutes. And then you go out and look on the gauge and it tells you how much water you're putting down. And the beauty is in Meridian, in Nampa, it's a little harder to make this message felt because they all have pressurized irrigation where they're not paying. But if you're paying for city water, you'll pay for these gauges in one watering by just watering the right amount. And so 1 inch of water per week, you simply put these out, run the sprinkler system and pour them all together. And then you've got your hourly output of your lawn. We're also recommending even, we talked about this at the Drought Task Force meeting in Nampa this week, that we no longer want people watering early in the morning. We want people watering when the water is available. And the other aspect about this is really important is you need to be watering when you can see your sprinkler system running. So if your sprinklers go off at 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got a broken head, you don't even know it's broken until some crazy neighbor sees it coming home from Micron. And if they happen to tell you, but otherwise you're just wasting that water and you can't figure out why you got a dry spot. And as soon as people see a dry spot, what do? They turn the water up. And if there's something wrong in their system, they're just wasting water, not making things better. So by doing this, you can get an accurate gauge of how much water am I actually putting down. These are cheap, they'll last forever, loan them to your neighbors or whatever. I'd like to tell you these are widely available. They weren't, I had to find them just to provide them. But this is a very useful tool. This is how they do, one of our employees worked at a casino in Las Vegas, and the city of Las Vegas says if you want to have turf, you have to prove to us in a monthly audit that you're not wasting water. Otherwise, you can't have turf. And so when he shared that with me, I thought, man, a lot of people would like to know, especially if they're paying for their water, am I putting down enough or am I just wasting money? So this is how you do that. Now, the other concept that's really important is what we're calling the water battery. And you have clay soil that doesn't have a lot of carbon built up into it, and it's not terribly alive compared to like a forest environment. But the bacteria that would exist in a healthy soil environment carry a ton of bacteria and fungi. They have a ton of water around that bacteria and fungi that help create this water battery in the soil, the water holding capacity. And by paying attention to those organisms, you can make your soil survive drought more effectively. All you need to do is think about the ground more like a compost pile and less like just a dead substrate. So if you haven't ever done composting, there's this compost concept that they talk about mixing greens and browns. And so what that means in common vernacular, I guess, would be if you just took grass clippings and put them in a pile, they won't compost. They'll just sit there for a long time. If you take just a pile of leaves, they'll just sit there and they don't compost. But if you mix leaves and grass, you'll look out the window. In 3 weeks, there'll be steam coming off the pile. And in a month and a half, the whole thing will be gone. It's because the carbon to nitrogen ratio, the greens and browns in that compost pile are optimized so that the bacteria will do well in the compost pile. The same is true in the ground. The hard part for us in Idaho is that lawn fertilizer is made for the Midwest, where that soil is black with carbon. And that soil can handle more nitrogen, which is what the grass wants. The grass does really well here. We'll use a lot of nitrogen, but the soil can't handle it. But we don't have the carbon. So what happens over time is you lose that water battery and you end up just with grass growing in a completely dead substrate. So what we've been trying to do for the last 40 years in this valley is help people understand that if you have a carbon component, And before the product we call Humigreen, it was compost. People put compost on their lawn. And in Idaho, it makes a huge difference. Adding that carbon, it's like adding the leaves to the grass clippings. If you add that carbon and get that carbon to nitrogen ratio balanced, you'll find that all of the life in the soil helps hold a ton of water for you naturally. It makes it so that you can water deep and infrequently, and your lawn does fine. So I have, and this is available on the website, but I have some images in this flyer that I put together that show what happens typically when people are watering really infrequent, and you know, they're just doing short periods of time and watering like every day or every other day. The roots do the very opposite of what I'm talking about going deep. The roots come up because there's no need to go deep. The water is all shallow. And then the grass clippings set on top, and then people are trying to do power rake because they've got thatch problems and all the rest of that. The reality is, by failing to water properly, your roots are coming shallow and you're causing a thatch problem, and you're causing a lawn that has no capability to handle any period of time without water. So the reason why we're making a big push for this at the very beginning of the season is there is plenty of time for us if we start right now. Purposely let your grass get thirsty, not dead, just get it a little bit thirsty, then water. And then turn your sprinkler system back off and let the grass get thirsty, and then turn it on and water, and then turn it off again. And you're doing that through this beginning part of the season. You'll send the roots deeper so that you don't end up with this thatch problem. If you can tend to the carbon, which is you use a little bit less nitrogen than you would if you lived in Iowa or Illinois, and use things like compost as a top dress, or Humigreen if you're a Zamzows customer, but think about that carbon aspect. That's a huge benefit to you that people don't always think about. Okay, the very last tip for you is the way that you mow your lawn will make a huge difference. So you need to go and set the blade of your mower all the way to the top and down 1. Down 2 if you just can't stand to be that high. But what happens with the longer grass blade is you shade the surface of the ground, and each time you cut that grass, you're causing injury that causes it to need more water to repair, and you have evaporation, but you're also losing the shade on the ground, which causes it to dry out faster. So by setting your blade up higher, you will make a huge difference in that grass's ability to handle periods of drought. And we keep talking about this, about what will happen if the water becomes more scarce, like at the very end. Even if you're just going to switch and pull from the aquifer, there's no sense in just wasting money by overwatering. You want to have enough water so that your grass is the greenest in the neighborhood without just writing checks to Lorelei. Right? So you don't have to waste water to have a beautiful lawn. Okay, so there's some other side benefits. In 1996, when I started working at Zamzows, we had 1 bag of lawn fungus control that we never sold. We just brought it every year and put a fresh sticker on it. Now we sell pallets and pallets and pallets of disease control. And it's because everybody is overwatering, watering improperly. It's like walking around all summer long in irrigating boots without socks and wondering why you got athlete's foot, right? And it doesn't matter how good fast-actin Tinactin is, if you don't wear some cotton socks and tennis shoes, you can't get it under control. And lawn fungus is exactly that way. You can't overwater, keeping the soil surface wet and moist all the time, and avoid fungus. So if you water properly, you'll have 0 fungus. And anybody that's ever started weeds or started seeds in a seed starting kit, you recognize that the seedlings have to be moist all the time. And so as your neighbors' dandelions that they won't spray, as those weeds land on your lawn, touch the surface, germinate, if you're not watering again until next Thursday, they germinate and die. And new weeds have a really hard time getting established in lawns that are watered properly. By just simply watering properly, you can have less weeds, save money, have a greener lawn, no lawn fungus, And we can go on and on and on about the benefits of breaking up clay and all other things. So the only other issues that sometimes people have that are worth addressing is sometimes people say, if I water more than 10 minutes, it just runs off into the gutter. And there are things that you can do to treat your lawn so that that doesn't happen. Don't let that be the excuse for you to just always water every single day for 10 minutes because it washes. The better technique is to fix that long term. And as those roots move down into that clay, it's the same. A clay vessel will hold water until it has a crack in it. And then the water runs along the crack and it will leak. And as you build this drought muscle and the roots go down and crack that clay, the more water will penetrate, the more roots will go down, and the better your clay situation will get. So the benefits of doing this properly are way beyond just saving a little bit of water in a drought year. This is big, big benefits, and I'm just thrilled there's a drought so everyone will listen. So I think we're going to take some questions. So however you're going to do that. You're going to do it as a panel, or we?
Yeah, so I think, so thanks so much for that. That was really useful tips and, you know, really good things that people don't know. So I did want to point everybody to a city resource. We have a water conservation page that will give you some tips about how to also conserve water inside your home. And then we also have a really fun family event that's coming up in 2 weeks. It's Meridian's Public Works Week Expo. So it's a fun event. You can bring your family down and learn more about what Public Works does. We bring out all of our big equipment and our staff, and it's a really fun time to kind of show your kids and families how people get their water and how we treat that wastewater. So with that, we will jump into questions.
These are some questions that were sent ahead of time. So if you want to just start with that list, and then Stephanie has some from people who are watching online.
Okay, so one of the first questions that came in online was, why does my tap water smell so highly of chlorine? And is there a way that we can check the content or amount of that chlorine? So I'm going to bring up our water superintendent, Dennis Teller, to help us answer that question. Don't go too far.
All right, we'll stay together here. So yes, that is a very good question that we get from time to time, and it's kind of a long chemical answer. So I'll try to summarize it for you. As Lorelei stated earlier, the city of Meridian is supplied solely with groundwater sources through wells, and those wells have really good water quality. And we want to keep it that way. So in order to do that, once we bring it out of the ground and put it in our distribution system, we do add chlorine. And we do that as a precaution in case something were to happen to our system. If we had damages, like you watch in the movies all the time that people run fire hydrants over. But if any time that the system is opened up, we're vulnerable to any kind of contamination that could occur. So the chlorine is added to make sure that if anything were to be introduced into the system, that we could mitigate that and get rid of that as soon as possible. The problem with that is that our wells all have differing water quality, and some of them may have an iron content to them or a manganese content to them. And in order to add chlorine properly, those constituents need to be consumed by the chlorine before any kind of disinfection is active and available within the water itself. So if we had one well within the city of Meridian, we could easily add chlorine to the point where it's consumed, and we would have a little bit of chlorine left over to consume anything if it got into the system. It would be perfect. But we actually have multiple wells, about 26 of them, that mix from time to time. As you can imagine, in the wintertime, we only have a few of our sources running in order to use to supply water to our customers. But in the summertime, we basically have almost all of our wells on. So when those wells and those differing water qualities mix, they can actually dilute the chlorine levels between each other. And of course, we've got about 600+ miles of water lines within our system. And as chlorine's in water, the longer it sits, the more it kind of degrades. So when chlorine dilutes in our drinking water, we can get down below that level of where it is still trying to consume some of the constituents and minerals within our system. And actually a lower chlorine level in our water system actually can give you the effect and smell and taste of chlorine. So that is kind of a long answer to a kind of complicated question, but it is I can say that it is a very low level of chlorine, although it does seem like it may be a little bit higher. And then on the second part of that question is, how can you check? There are actually kits that you can get to check your chlorine residuals, or you can just give us a call and we can go out and check for you if you're curious.
All right,
Okay.
thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Do you have another question?
Why do we not try to capture more rainwater?
Okay, so the question was, why do we not try to capture more rainwater? And that's kind of a challenging question. So as we mentioned with the reservoirs, we're limited on the amount of storage space that we have. So we do capture that rainwater in the reservoirs, and in a good water year, we do have plenty of capacity in there. But the infrastructure that it would take to capture all of that rainwater all of the time would be a really significant project. So we try to capture that rainwater for the most part in the reservoirs.
Does AMSOS have classes or online resources for plants, flowers, and how to water?
So the question was, does ZAMZOS have classes on plants, flowers, and how to do watering?
Yeah, the answer is yes. We just did a big series of classes on watering. There'll be another one, I'm sure, this summer. It wasn't specifically, I assume that it's about watering flowers and that type of stuff. So there will be another one of those this summer, I'm sure.
What's the best way to keep my car clean while still trying to be conscientious of water and conserve water?
So the question was, what is the best way to keep my car clean while also being conscientious of water? So while I'm not an expert in this, I would say probably the best thing is to be mindful of your hose running the entire time while you're washing your car. So try to only turn it on when you're needing to rinse, and then turn it off so that you're using as little water as possible.
And then what can the city do to help with HOAs having homes not run water too much?
So the question was, what can people do to encourage their HOA if there's homes in their neighborhood that are watering too much? So, we would recommend that you reach out to your HOA and have them try to message some of the information that you heard tonight about spreading out the time of use, the day of use, reducing your water. Most HOAs do have actually covenants and rules in their subdivision in place that do dictate when you can and can't water. One of the tips that we heard from the irrigation districts is if you're trying to water and you have low pressure, wait a little while and see water later when there's somebody else is not watering, and that spreads out that peak use. And so our tip would probably be to contact your HOA and do some neighborhood outreach.
Because of the projected growth, are there plans for additional storage?
All right, so the question was going back to storage. With the additional growth that's coming to the valley, are there plans for additional storage projects? And there are. So I mentioned and talked about the Anderson Ranch dam raise. There's another project that's on the horizon too. It's called Cat Creek Energy Project. And that project is actually anticipated to bring, I think it's over 100,000 acre feet of storage as well. So that project is moving through approval processes as well.
I would add, one of the things I think a lot of people misunderstand, I see on social media, they say, with all these people coming, we're going to use a lot more water, when the reality is you've got the entire valley was farm. They were using water, and we're replacing those farms with neighborhoods that have a significant amount of the area that was irrigated is now under asphalt and under roofs. And so if the people in those neighborhoods are watering the right amount of water use should actually go down with urbanization, not up. Regardless of how many people come from Southern California, the water usage should still go down, not up.
Well, Mike, to help you with the Cat Creek project, the reservoir,
Let me give you the mic.
the Cat Creek project, the reservoir will actually be over 100,000 acre feet of water, new storage, projected to come on in the late 20s, 26, 27, to be online and functioning. 80-some thousand acre feet of that water will be new storage water available for the valley, cities, irrigation companies, and so forth. Actually, should be online before the Anderson Ranch raise is completed.
Thank you. So those two new storage projects are really, it's really unique to get new storage water, and it's a really great, valuable resource, I think, that's going to occur in our area, and a once in a generational kind of project that these projects are. Any other questions?
Sorry. Who should I contact if I see broken sprinklers in the grass by sidewalks? Is that the city?
So that's a good question. So the question was, who do I contact if I see broken sprinklers? You drive by and you see that one that's shooting 10 feet in the air. Who should I contact? The answer is it depends. So it's generally not the city. It will generally either be the HOA or that individual homeowner. Generally, if it's in the common areas or in the parks in your subdivision, that would be the HOA that you would contact. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody in person and online for attending tonight. And don't forget to visit our website for conservation tips. SAMSO's website also has great information. And we hope you learned a little bit about water supply in the Treasure Valley.